building a successful solo practice is really dependent upon someone's you know, clinical skills and interpersonal skills. So what I mean by that is, you got to have clinical skills to do the dentistry, right? However complicated, whatever the service offering is, you got to be able to create effective clinical outcomes. But you also have to, you can't just be a master clinician. You have to be able to present a treatment plan so somebody says yes to the treatment that you're proposing.
This is Growth in Dentistry, a dental intelligence podcast where we ask the question, what does growth in dentistry look like to you? I'm Katie Polson, a dental hygienist and your host. Welcome to Growth in Dentistry. I am Katie Polson, your host, and we have another great episode for you. It's a good one for those of you that are group practice owners or DSOs, or hey, maybe you want to get into that space. This is an episode you're not going to want to miss. We've got Perrin from Polaris Healthcare Partners. He's a wealth of knowledge, and it's a great episode you're not going to want to miss. That being said, if this is your first time listening, welcome. So glad to have you. Please reach out. We've got some awesome content in the back. We've got there's tons. Deep dive episodes of practices, more DSO episodes like this, and also some shorter episodes, 30 minutes or so, where we have some key opinion leaders on, and we talk about how to solve some problems in the dental practice. So something for everyone. If this is not your first time, you're a returning listener, thank you so much for joining us again. If you wouldn't mind going and rating and reviewing this podcast, it helps us very much. And if you are a fan of Facebook, want to join us there, we've got some good conversation going on over there. Go to our dental intelligence community there in Facebook. And last but not least, if you are a current customer, if you're not a current customer of Dental Intelligence, and you want to be one, or you want to see how that can affect your practice, we'd love for you to go to get.dentalintel.com/podcast to get $50 when you complete a demo by using that link. I'll make sure that is also in our show notes. Without further ado, I'd love to introduce Perrin DesPortes from Polaris Healthcare Partners. Guys, I was able to meet him at Voices of Dentistry this year. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to sit into his course. And so I was like, I know what we can do. We just have you on the show. You can give us a mini course. So you're in for a real treat, especially for those of you that, everyone, but I'm particularly really excited because this guy knows what he's talking about when it comes to group practice. So, Perrin, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Katie, let's don't build this up to be more than it actually is. Okay. We're not going to land a man on the moon today. And for the audience, I will let them know that I had saved you a seat right in front of the auditorium so you could be there eyes wide open to drink in my presentation. You have no idea what you missed, but it's great to be on with you today. I really appreciate it.
We're not landing anybody on the moon. You know what?
At least not yet,
Yeah. Weirder things have happened. We for sure could make this into a really awesome show that people
start our own DSO up there.
Yeah. That might be needed eventually soon. You never know. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you landed in this crazy world of dentistry.
Yeah, this weird subset of a niche, as I like to call it. So I'll give you a real quick background on me. I was actually born into the industry, so to speak. My extended family, owned a dental distribution company headquartered out of Columbia, South Carolina, called Thompson Dental Company, and it was started by my great-grandfather in 1899, James Perrin Thompson. My father was president and CEO, and my grandfather was chairman of the board. And in April of 2002, we elected to sell that business to Patterson Dental Supply, not necessarily for financial or operational reasons, but due to what I like to call poor equity transition reasons. My father has two sisters, and they did not work in the business, nor did their husbands or any of their children. And upon my grandfather's ultimate demise, it was going to be a challenging business to transition for those that just wanted to get their money out. So that being said, Patterson was incredibly good to me. I spent 15 years working for them. I ran 3 different businesses for them over that career, and did really well and learned a tremendous amount about large publicly traded businesses and had full P&L responsibility from the age of 31 on. And if I knew what that meant at the time, I probably wouldn't have taken the job. So they really put a lot of trust and faith in me. And I'd like to think that I repaid that over that career. And as those 15 years were winding on, I wasn't going to move to Minneapolis. I was in my mid 40s at the time, newly married, and we had a young daughter. And my wife's an ophthalmologist here in Charlotte. And, I wasn't going to uproot the family and move to Minneapolis. And I didn't want to live life on an airplane. So when you start thinking about your career in those contexts, it sort of becomes a you problem than a company problem. And so with a couple of friends, I decided to launch a venture prior to Polaris called Tusk Partners. And my current partner, DeWalker Sinha, and I left Tusk Partners to launch Polaris in March of 2021. We are a strategic consulting and M&A advisory firm that focuses exclusively with group dental practices. And we really don't work with, I would call, traditional solo practices, private practices, and we don't work with private equity-backed enterprise level DSOs. We only work with the entrepreneurial dentists, the men and women who want to own more than one location. They want to build a group. It could be 2 or 3 locations. It could be 20 or 30 locations. And all of the consulting resources, all of the sell-side advisory resources, the capital sourcing, associate equity models, guidance, education, and everything else that we do at Polaris is solidly focused in that space we call doctor founded and debt funded. So
Mhm.
our target client is an entrepreneurial dentist who wants to build a multi-location dentistry group of their own.
Yeah, definitely makes Polaris, I think, pretty different. I think for sure, like you've got this very niche, like you said, subset of a niche. It's like
Yeah.
dentistry, DSO, even
Yep.
smaller. Yeah,
Yep.
I love that you know exactly who you want to go after. That's really awesome. And like we were talking before, those are the people that need it the most. For those, I mean, we may have some listeners that stumble upon this episode that aren't really familiar with like the DSO space really at all.
Sure.
So let's like, if they're interested in it all, like you gave me some good advice or give information just before we hopped on about the DSO structure. Like, what does that even mean? Can we revisit that here and help just give a baseline for people that may or may not quickly, because there might be people like, yeah, I know I'm in one. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So I think DSO is an acronym that gets thrown around a lot in our world. And it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And they're really not clear on what it is. And when they say they want to build one, they're not truly sure what that exactly means. So I'm going to just try to take this quickly and at a high level and
Mhm.
and not confuse, hopefully not confuse people about it. Um, so a DSO is first and foremost a legal structure. It's a management company. The management company or DSO has a relationship to the practices that it manages, and it provides non-clinical services, administrative services to those practices in exchange for the practice paying a fee for those services. The legal structure of a group practice that has a DSO, meaning a management company that sits
Mhm.
above it, uh, typically has some bearing on the ownership structure of those businesses. So you can have ownership at a practice level, which in most states at least has charts and records practices have to be owned by licensed dentists. You and I can't own charts
Yeah.
and records in most states, but you and I can own part of a management company that provides administrative services to the practices they manage.
Mhm.
So when an entrepreneur wants to build a multi-location group and they say they want to build a DSO, my first question is, well, do you mean a legal structure to reflect that? Or what's the ownership structure? Like, are you going to have minority partners or equal partners, and who's
Mhm.
going to own what? And we have to get clear on that. And the third piece is depending upon how big of a business you want to build, meaning locations. Do you need to centralize administrative services? Do you need to have a C-suite leadership team? Do you need to have a call center for patient confirmations and inbound inquiries and accounts receivable and insurance processing and all these other non-clinical functions? Are you going to build a business it's big enough to warrant that investment. That is an operational DSO, a four-wall building typically with a roof on it and a lot of people who work in it that have headsets like you and I have on right now.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So DSO stands for Dental Support or Dental Service Organization, and it can be a legal structure that's usually reflected in the equity structure that is often reflected in the operational structure, and the financial reporting structure of cost allocations would mimic all of that.
Yeah.
So if you have people in the audience who aren't sure what it means, but they know they want to build one, let's get clear on what you want to build, why you want to build it, and what you actually need to do it.
Yeah. That was super helpful for me. I mean, I just me being in dentistry my whole life, I've always just like attributed DSO to the amount of locations something has, not like the management company that runs it. So
Yeah, it really,
super
honestly, it
helpful.
doesn't
Thanks.
have anything to do with a number of locations.
Yeah.
It
That was really helpful for me. Awesome. Well, let's get into, so I was able to, let's first talk about, maybe we should start with actually like, how do you know like if a DSO or being in a group would be right for you? Like if you're a own practice owner looking to sell, or maybe you want to expand yourself. Like that, let's take that avenue and then we'll
Yep.
kind of like meander.
Yeah. So, and you know, there are a lot of successful solo dentists that are, let's just call them mid-career, whatever that means, 35 to 55 or something like that. And they do high quality dentistry, and they typically make a lot of income doing it. And they see the proliferation of group practices and these enterprise level DSOs that are typically private equity backed, the multi-hundred location, name
Yeah.
brands we all know and love, as I like to say. And the successful solo dentist who is making a lot of money and doing high quality dentistry, at some point in your career, at some point in their career, they probably reach a level of boredom. We all get diluted by our success and we kind of have Groundhog Day. And I was kind of going through this personally when I was at Patterson. So this is not unique to dentistry or even healthcare services for that matter. But you kind of get bored and then you start looking around saying, well, I know some dentist colleague that I went to dental school with who built a multi-location group and sold it to a private equity group or to one of the name brands we all know and love. And that joker cashed in a check for $10 million and he's not that bright, So how hard can it be? I think I'm going to do it too. And we see a lot of people who, because they have a successful location, they think adding a second or a third is equally easy. It's just the same thing as location one times two. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like having children. The reason my wife and I don't have two is because we have one. All right. So, that's enough for us. And for those that want to build a group, you really want to understand what you're trying to build and why you're trying to build it. And what I mean by that is this a group that you're going to build that might be 3 or 4 locations? And the reason you want to build it is for cash flow purposes. You don't want your and your family's income to be solely dependent upon your clinical skills in one location. You'd like to have multiple locations. You'd like to have a handful of associates, maybe some minority partners along the way, and you'd like to be able to derive passive income from all of those collective services and not run the risk of you having a health scare or something happening to you
Mm-hmm.
and shipwrecking the family boat, so to speak. And so that's a perfectly legitimate reason to build a group. On the other hand, you may say, look, I'm at a stage where I can take some risks. I want to build a multi-location group that I can grow and ultimately exit within 5 years. And I want to put $10 million in my family bank account after debt service and after taxes are paid. So I'm going to build a business for exit. That's a
Mm-hmm.
totally different endeavor than a cash flow business with totally different objectives, but both have rock solid outcomes. The
Mm-hmm.
reason that people, I think, should be considering building a group, and I'm very eyes wide open about how challenging this is to do, and we see a lot of failure. So I don't think groups are the right thing for everybody. if you're 5 years from retirement, you can probably ride out whatever storm, sell your business, and live a happy life in retirement. But if you are 10 years or more from exiting the profession, you've got to be really you've got to be really understanding of what the competitive pressures are going to be around that solo practice over the next 10 years.
Yeah.
And it's a gut check time to say, am I going to be able to maintain that level of income quantifiably and definitively for a decade or more? And I would tell you there's going to be a lot that's going to change in the coming decade or more. And I don't know how many truly successful solo practices are going to be able to remain successful in light of those competitive pressures. And that is a compelling reason to explore building a group, if for no other reason than it's a defensive strategy, like I mentioned in the beginning. So I think
Hmm.
those that are 10 years out or more should consider it, and a lot of them are because they see others doing it. Those that are maybe 5 years from retirement, can ride it out. But if you're going to be in the profession for a lot longer, you've got to have a really unique business to be successful as a solo dentist, earning a high income and kind of being resistant to competitive pressures.
Yeah, that's super sobering, but needed to hear. I mean, like I grew up in a dental family, and our practices is I probably right at this point of where you're talking about, and I've seen it, change for better or for worse, right? Like,
Yeah,
yeah, whatever side you sit on that fence of whether you think that they're the devil or not, like
yeah.
it's the climate that we're in, and we can make it better for the patients or not. I love that you are thinking about it as a defensive strategy. It's really
I,
cool.
there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with building a multi-location group methodically, meaning it's slow pace. Like you don't have
Mhm.
to go from 1 to 4 in 1 year,
Right.
I would recommend you not do that.
Mhm.
But, to think about it like, it's the same reason a traditional solo dentist hires an associate or
Mhm.
several associates. They don't want the business to be solely dependent upon their clinical skill set. And
Yeah.
in a multi-location group, you kind of hedge your bets, you
Mhm.
know, and you can also create ownership opportunities for those associates at a minority partner level, that doesn't upset your ownership apple cart or doesn't jeopardize your control of the business, and still allows you to make what I would call passive income about it. And there's nothing wrong with building a business like that.
Yeah. So it's really, really great advice. Let's get into, if we're ready, like the entrepreneurial journey pyramid that you
Mhm.
guys have coined. I was looking through your slide deck. I was like, wow, this is like, I actually understand this. So it must be cool. If Katie can understand it,
Yeah, yeah,
then it must be good.
yeah. We're
So
getting somewhere now, right?
if a lowly hygienist can
Yeah.
understand it. So, so tell us a little bit about that, and how, I guess, how you first came up with this. Super smart, but and then walk us through that pyramid and how it helps practices.
So, yeah, so the entrepreneurial journey, and the pyramid that we built for it, and I can send you I can clip the slide on PDF if you want to link to it in show notes, just so people can
Sure.
get a
Yeah,
visual,
let's
or
do it.
let them download it or something like that. So the way we think about this is, building a successful solo practice is really dependent upon someone's you know, uh, clinical skills and interpersonal skills. So what I mean by that is, you got to have clinical skills to do the dentistry, right? However complicated, whatever the service offering is, you got to be able to create effective clinical outcomes. But you also you can't just be a master clinician. You have to be able to present a treatment plan so somebody says yes to the treatment that you're proposing. So that's the interpersonal skills on a patient level. And then if you want to minimize staff turnover to create some level of cohesion, you got to have interpersonal skills amongst the team, right? And I know this sounds obvious, but think about all the solo practices we know that don't do what I just said. And
Right.
you and I can probably take shots in the dark on what the revenue number looks like for those businesses, and it's not as good as for those clinicians who can do what I just said. And then, if you can replicate that over a long period of time, you got the operational skills and the systems to like run a good business that happens to be a healthcare services business. Now, that's a solid solo practice. To go to 3 to 4 locations or something like that, you've got to be able to replicate culture, systems, and some level of control because you're not going to be in every location simultaneously the way you can be in your practice. So now we're reaching outside of the 4 walls of our primary practice, and we're building a business that is successful even when we're not necessarily there. And that type of expansion at a minimal level, I just say like 3 or 4 locations, just to throw out a number, is still manageable as long as you don't try to go too quickly to do that. So the control piece is really a big deal. If you're going to go from roughly 5 locations to 20 or something like that, you're probably doing it to create a wealth changing opportunity for you and your family. It's those businesses are usually built around some level of exit, and to scale a business like that requires a high degree of execution. So this
Mm.
gets much more complicated the further up the pyramid you go, and the complication of it is born out of the financial risk and reward that you take to do it. You're going to be
Yeah.
personally guaranteeing a lot of debt along the way. And you're going to have more people in different locations where you can't be. So the complexity around the people, isn't just one or twofold, it's geometrically more. So people go through this kind of progression, this process, this evolution, if you will. And we try to just kind of think it through like what makes or breaks businesses at different stages
Mm.
and what should somebody expect if they're gonna undertake the journey. And then obviously the financial piece of it is one where as a successful solo dentist, again, you probably generate a healthy amount of income, and when you start building a smaller group, you generate hopefully more personal income passively, meaning through the skills of others. But if you're going to build that business for size and scale and have an exit intention, that's a generational wealth changing, usually transaction. And there are ways to successfully build into that. So the pyramid is just our way of kind of laying out the thought process and trying to be congruent with giving people like an idea of what they should expect at what phase.
Yeah. And I mean, it makes total sense. And as I have interacted with, hundreds of practices now through my position at Dental Intelligence and watching them, and they all kind of fall into one of these buckets, right? And
Yes,
and watching
yes,
them kind of like falter, you've got like in the pyramid, you've kind of got like almost steps or ladders, right? And like there's space in between there. And like I'm sure it takes a lot of growth and learning to get to the next one. So
it does.
yeah, yeah. Well, let's get into for the next little bit here in our part 2 of our podcast here, challenges, because I'm sure we could talk about this for a long time. You talked about challenges of building a group, and those that are listening that have either tried to start one or are in one and are feeling the pain, like what challenges are there? And then like examples and how do they combat that?
Yeah, so for those who are still awake and with us, and really
Oh, they're
dialed
awake
in,
now.
yeah,
They're dialed in. Wake up.
So, I think there are a handful of challenges that we see for the people building groups, and they're not in necessarily any order of sequence or, you know, gravity or importance, but we see I hate to put it this way, we see different people making the same mistakes and
Mm,
stepping on the same landmines. So the first one I would point out is what we um, refer to as the founder's dilemma, and the founder's dilemma is really talking about the founder of a successful solo practice, and again, he or she makes uh, usually a sizable amount of income, and they usually have a personal lifestyle that's this calibrated to that level of income, you know? And don't get me wrong, we all like being successful and we like the trappings of success and toys and trips and kids in private school and all that kinds of fun stuff, right? But when you're a successful solo dentist and you want to start adding multiple locations, what you find is that you want to spend time between locations, probably practicing clinically for the most part, but adding more locations means that you put on a hat of director of business development. Help me find another location to buy. Let me meet with that seller. Let me see if I can bring the transaction to conclusion and work to integrate that next practice. And I'm starting to transition out of a clinical role and into more of a CEO role, a leader role, a vision
Yeah,
role. And it's really tough to do both if you're working a full clinical load.
I can't
So
even imagine.
yeah, and
Yeah.
there's just literally not enough time in the day, and you couple it with the fact that dentistry is a very physically demanding profession. It will literally wear you out.
And
Okay.
mentally, I mean, to
Yeah.
mentally deal with the patients and then to deal with what you're talking about. I
Yeah.
can't imagine. Yeah.
So what typically happens is somebody says, well, I want to I want to be the CEO of the business. I don't want to practice. I want to practice 1 day a week. I'm going to drop from 4 days a week to one. Well,
Hmm.
the dentistry that's needed by the patients doesn't magically go away. That's the first thing. It's still there. So what do? You hire an associate to do the work that you're no longer doing. But you got to pay that associate to do the work that you're no longer doing. There's only so much cash in these businesses.
Hmm.
So if you're paying the associate to do the clinical work that you're no longer doing, that's income from your prior clinical services that you're not taking home.
Hmm.
Okay, so there's the first red flag.
Yeah.
How much is that going to cost you? Well, I don't know. Well, if you don't know, let's don't go from 4 days a week to 1 day a week next week. All right,
Yeah.
we
Right.
probably ought to do this gradually and we probably ought to quantify the impact that it's going to make. So, what they
Mm.
incorrectly assume is, well, when I buy the next practice, it's going to be cash flowing so magnificently that it will offset every bit of clinical income I'm leaving behind. And
Mm.
they don't factor in that whatever the EBITDA levels are and everything else, they don't factor in after debt service, meaning paying the bank for the loan you took on, what the free cash flow is net of debt, net of taxes. And is it enough to offset the clinical income they left behind? And usually it is not. So
Mm.
what typically happens when somebody starts building a group is they take an income hit for a period of time until they can build their way out of it. It's also the reason that people shouldn't drop from 4 days a week clinical to one, you know, all at once. They probably gradually phase out of that clinical role over maybe a year's time, even
Yeah.
dropping 1 day a week per quarter or something like that. So that's the first one. How do we build a multi-location group without taking a massive income hit?
Hmm.
The second one would be um, you know, most people building groups are acquiring practices. Some of them do a de novo strategy, which is a cold start, which we love, but understandably, attracting patient number one can be a daunting challenge. I get
Hmm.
it. So they buy other practices. So how do they reconcile the difference between percentage of collections for valuation multiple versus multiple of EBITDA versus free cash flow?
Mm.
And those are all different. And you have to understand how to calculate all of them differently to understand the magnitude of the impact on what you're about to do. Are you going to overpay for a practice? There may be a reason to do that, a compelling reason to do it.
Mm.
Um, do you know what you're paying as a multiple of EBITDA? Do you understand the cost of the debt? And do you understand what the free cash flow is to you and your bank account? And if you don't know how to connect all those dots, you need to pump the brakes before you sign any paper.
Mm.
So, how do we acquire practices? What do we pay for them? And what are the improvements we think we're going to make out of them? This is where we, in an odd way, for somebody who owns a consulting company, you'd think we would want to push our clients to buy more, more, more.
Mm.
In fact, we tend to pull the reins on them and pump the brakes a lot for that very reason. Let's not get overextended because the bank will get paid, you might not. All
Mm.
right. So the third thing beyond how to acquire or how to buy or build practices is the securing of debt funds. Like I mentioned, all of our clients are using bank funds to grow, and bank funds, even in a rising rate environment, are without a doubt the right vehicle to building a group. Everybody that says, well, I'm going to get to 5 locations and bring on private equity, doesn't know what private equity is or really does. And if they truly understood the value of the business that they were building, they would never give up equity at that early of a stage because
Mm,
they don't understand the value of the equity. And that's a
mm,
shame because people take the risk to build a business and an equity partner benefits more than they will.
mm,
So you should be using bank funds to grow for a long time. You should be comfortable personally guaranteeing debt to a large, large degree, and you definitely have to understand the value of the equity in the business that you have to make the journey worth the while. So finding the right lender, getting in a committed relationship with a lender that will lend you 10, 20, $50 million to build a business you want over however many years it is the right strategy. But those are not retail lenders. So banking is people think they understand banking because every retail bank loves to lend money to dentists because they never default, but not every retail bank loves to lend money to multi-location owners because they
mm,
do default a lot more frequently. So
mm.
debt funds are a piece of it. The last thing I'll say is if you're going to build a multi-location group, attracting and retaining associates is the number one challenge of
Yeah,
every group practice.
I would
And
imagine.
having a methodology around recruiting, motivating, and an equity or an ownership plan for people who are going to be minority partners in the business on either a buy-in or an earn-in strategy is of paramount importance, or you're just building a revolving door. And that's that's an I would ne that's a nightmare. I would never want anybody to do that.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like a fun thing to even be a part of. And also for when you've got a revolving door with clinic with your providers, then you also have a revolving door with your patients. And you're constantly having to fill the chairs with new patients because people pick up on that. They don't want to be taken care of by a new dentist every time they come in.
No, I mean, we don't want to be treated like cattle. And I mean, I like to
Yeah.
say that if you're turning over associates, it's terrible for the continuity of clinical care, and it's terrible for the continuity of cash flow. I mean, what more
Mm,
do you need to know to solve it?
yeah, for sure. Well, it sounds like a that I mean I learned a lot, but there's a lot that you can help. There's a lot of things you could do to help. So I'm gonna give you an opportunity to talk about how you can help if people want to reach out to you, and then I'll ask
Yeah.
my last question that I ask everybody that comes on the show. How
Uh-oh.
yeah, oh, it's easy.
Okay.
And you guys define it. So it'll be easy for you. So what how if people want to learn or more about you or use your services, how can they do that?
Yeah, so it's easy to check out our website, which is polarishealthcarepartners.com. I like to say when we launched the business, we looked for the longest unclaimed URL, and I think we found it. So I can I can send you all that type of paraphernalia. But so we do offer consulting services. We call it strategic consulting. So it's growth strategy. You can kind of pick up on probably a lot of things I talked about today about sort of the way we approach helping people build groups. We are not a dental practice management company. There are a lot of dental practice management companies that focus, especially in the solo space, that do
Mhm.
operational stuff like scheduling efficiency and hygiene retention and case acceptance, and we don't do any of that. We're growth strategists. We work with the C-suite of the business to help them build and execute a growth strategy. So it's a different deal working with us. We're very analytically driven. We build financial models of every business that we work with, along with something we call a 5-year growth pro forma, which is the simple answer to the question of where do you want to be in 5 years?
Yeah.
And what's the activity we got to do to get there? And
Uh,
somebody can have a great vision, but when we put the analytics to it and reverse engineer all the numbers, then it gets real, right?
uh-huh.
And are we committed or not? So,
Right.
growth strategy and strategic consulting is one of the primary things we do. I mentioned associate equity or associate ownership models that are either buy-in or earn-in. We build those models for clients. We do debt growth. We call it growth capital solutions, which is a, a, a middle market lender committing to a group practice to loan them, $5 million to execute their growth strategy, like a line of credit, essentially, that
Mm-hmm.
refreshes every year. So the growth capital solution is a major part of our services. We can help a client exit their business if they're ready to sell to a private equity group or an enterprise level DSO. And the place to start for if you have a lot in your audience here that are traditional solo practices and they're
Mm-hmm.
curious about building a group and literally they don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
And that's not uncommon. Everybody starts out there. We have a 1 day service offering we call a discovery day. And that's one-on-one with the client. It's not a group setting. I teach probably about 70% of them or something like that. Our other advisors teach a number of them too, but it's group practice fundamentals. It's kind of that legal structure, debt structure, what is EBITDA, associate equity, all the things we've hit on today. We go into a much deeper level, and because it's one-on-one with the client, we can kind of tailor the day to their needs. And what we find is that everybody who comes and spends a day with us has two or three things they got to find out and they want to know. But over the course of that day, we kick over about 4 or 5 things that they had no idea to ask about,
Mm.
that now they have 6 to 7 hours with an advisor to go deep on it. And there are no stupid questions and there are no too personal questions that they would never ask in a group setting. It's all one-on-one.
Oh,
So
what a great
it's a,
service.
yeah, I mean, it's a, I like teaching them because every day is different,
Mm-hmm.
I've got a client coming in tomorrow from New York, he's actually coming back for a second when he came to see me last year, and we're going to do a refresh for him. But those are fun days for me. And the last thing I'll say about the Discovery Day option is that probably about 1 out of 4 that comes and spends a day with me elects not to build a group. So I'm not there to tell you how great we are. I'm not there to sell you on working with us, and I'm not there to say you should do this.
Mm-hmm.
There may be a lot of reasons that you should not, and
Yeah.
we don't pull any punches about that.
I think it definitely would be just worth right? If you're toying with it, or if you're at this point where you've got 10 years left and you don't know what to do, right? At least you can go get some help, make a decision, right? Like just the unknown of what to do is sometimes enough to like cause major anxiety for people.
I, I'll tell you really quick. I was talking to a guy that came and spent a day with us about a year ago. I was talking to him yesterday, and he elected not to build a group. And one of his colleagues in their local market asked him about it, and the colleague said, "Well, I guess the money you paid Polaris for the day together was a total waste, huh?" And he goes, "Absolutely not. It was the best money I ever spent not to learn not to do it."
Right,
So
exactly.
I
Because if
was like,
you,
yeah,
yeah, if you go into the pressure of just feeling, okay, well, maybe I should, then think how much you could have lost on
yeah.
that. Yeah, for sure. Well, this has been super fun for me and I've learned a ton. What does growth in dentistry mean to you?
Um, so I think it means different things at different stages,
Uh-huh.
if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
Growth early on probably is for a clinician is all about becoming a master at their craft,
Mm.
you know, learning how to do more complicated dentistry and having the confidence to do that. And in mid-career, it's the pride of running a successful business, solo practice, group practice, anything in between. And at the late stage of their career, it's the opportunity to leave a legacy and make a mark. And I don't think our journey at Polaris is too dissimilar from that, if I'm being honest. I mean, our company technically is only 2 years old, feels more like 6, but you know, uh, it's it's a quickly evolving business where we're really proud of the work we do and the clients we serve and the niche you mentioned before, like the
Hmm.
focus we have in a really, we don't want to be everything to everybody. And everything we talk about with our clients, we want to create at Polaris too. So
Yeah.
having our employees earn into the business and become owners and create a more multifaceted, dynamic business is what we're setting out to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. Such a great thing that you guys are providing. Thank you again for
It's
joining.
my pleasure.
It's been a pleasure for me too, and I'm sure for those listening. This has been Growth in Dentistry, a dental intelligence podcast. I'm Katie Polson. Keep growing.